All right, so we will start with polity. You have recovered from the weekend classes, as answers, ethics classes. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit different from both ethics as well as geography because the subject is different, right? And when we'll begin dissecting all the lines of the syllabus of GS paper 2, you will realize initially that because of the change in the subject, there are certain difficulties. At the same time, there are a lot of new vocabulary which will get introduced to you, that will be thrown at you, and it will look like you are not able to understand. I think you will understand, right? Because GS2, out of all the topics, out of all the subjects of GS 1, 2, 3, 4 essay, is the most technical subject because it derives heavily from, still not anyone from online, anyways, okay. It derives heavily from law to begin with. So you will see that 2-3 lines exactly find their mention in the law optional. Then 3-4 lines have been directly picked from PSIR, political science, right? And then of course 3-4 lines have been taken directly from public administration. And for that very reason, you will see that there are vocabularies that are derived from these subjects, right? So what promise I want from you is that if you're not able to understand a single word or a sentence, the idea is to stop me there. I did not get this word, please explain. Okay, let's first set the agenda, because if you miss out on understanding that subject, probably the whole topic is going to go down the drain and you are not going to understand anything. Okay, that is number one. Second is that doubt shall not be entertained while the class is going on. Correct? You understand the reason why? The reason is that this is not a foundation class, this is a revision class, and so you might not share the same level of doubts as other people. There are different levels of people with different levels of understanding in this class, online as well as offline. And so I will sit down with you outside the class for as long as your doubts are resolved, but not within the class, unless and until it deals with immediately understanding of a particular word. Okay, is this clear for everyone? Okay, so first let's understand the syllabus. I hope all of you have gone through the syllabus, and syllabus largely can be segregated into these lines, and they have been given in the syllabus like that itself. Indian Constitution. Today we'll start with historical underpinnings and features and significant provisions. Functions and responsibilities of the union and the states. And following that, you have a line in the syllabus which says issues and challenges pertaining to the federal structure. Why I have highlighted and boldened some of the keywords is that it tells you exactly what is the main expectation from that particular line, right? And so what we shall be doing is that although the syllabus does not give you everything, we are going to cover everything. The idea is to be prepared at best so that irrespective of whether a question has been motivated from current affairs or not. Last year we saw, I taught in class Article 356 and people said that Article 356 has not been used in a long while. So why are we discussing that? And there was a question in mains, and that too a 15 marker on Article 356. So UPSC has this tendency in mains, especially in GS paper 2, to ask very simple and straightforward question, as to write down the restrictions in Article 19 as straightforward as Bare Act. And it also has a tendency to ask very analytical questions. So we have to be prepared for both, right? And so while covering issues and challenges pertaining to federal structure, we will understand all the issues. Is this making sense? Okay. Separation of powers, we'll understand what separation of power means, and obviously the line following, comparison of Indian constitutional scheme with that of other countries, is a very tricky topic. So we shall heavily rely on notes, and I'm going to discuss some important constitution, and rest, it's your task. It's your job to prepare the remaining of the syllabus. Parliament and state legislatures, structure, organization, functioning of executive. I think we should be done in 7 classes until that point of time, and then 1 class completely for elections, because that is a very important topic this particular year. Correct? Because of general elections. Okay. And then you have topics of governance, which we shall see. Okay. So let's first dissect. The idea is to create a mind map so that you can understand all the dimensions related to a particular line, so that when you revise the PPT, when you watch the lectures again, when you read the compass, you understand why a particular topic was discussed in this particular sentence. So I want your participation, and do let me know, what do you understand by historical underpinnings? As to, if UPSC, the person who sets the paper, reads these two words, what are they likely to ask you as to what historical underpinning is all about? बीनू जी कोई नहीं है ऑनलाइन में? अच्छा ओके ठीक है, देयर इज नो नेट. यस, व्हाट्स योर नेम? अंजलि. Okay. Yeah, so basically historical underpinnings, Divyansh, you were saying something. Same thing. Okay. So constitutional development is just one dimension of this very large, as very large. यहाँ पे कोई आ नहीं रहा. That's right. Historical underpinning of the Indian Constitution would entail our understanding of how the Constitution came into existence. So when we say that Constitution came into existence, wait. Online people, am I visible and audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so there is nothing that you have missed, nothing important that you have missed. There was some internet connectivity issue because of which the class was not visible to you guys. So what I've discussed so far is the agenda setting. I want you to control your doubts until the class is over, because this is a QIP class. And we are going to, if there is any particular trouble with respect to the immediate understanding of the term that you have, you can interrupt me. And this is the first line of the syllabus that we just started dissecting. Okay. There's nothing else. Okay. Now we continue the discussion. Historical underpinning would mean how Constitution came into existence. So first thing that you have to understand, that Constitution came into existence through a Constituent Assembly. Correct? And so, with respect to the Constituent Assembly, there are certain observations. And so, we have to prepare and understand those observations as well. We'll see what are those observations. While the Constituent Assembly debates were going on, there were a lot of perspectives that were available as to how to shape the future India, how the constitution of free, independent, sovereign India should look like. There are debates around that we have to cover. And so we are going to cover broadly these three dimensions, apart from obviously Government of India Act. Evolution features amendments, significant provisions, and basic structure. Now you have to tell me, how do you create a mind map of evolution? What does constitutional evolution means? Amendments, right? But is it only through amendments that the Constitution has evolved? Yes. So there are multiple ways in the Constitution in which the Constitution has evolved. By amending the Constitution is just one way to evolve the Constitution. Interpretation through judiciary is another way through which Constitution evolves. Legislating the provisions of the Constitution, giving effect to executive provision, is the third way through which Constitution evolves. If there is a feature in the Constitution, like a uniform civil code, which creates a duty on the Parliament to create a law to provide for uniform civil code, but because there is no law, it basically means that it is a dead and ineffective, right? So for the full compliance and true realization of the Constitution, what you need is fulfillment of all three branches of the government in one direction, correct? Just the fact that you have provided a value in the Constitution without any legislative or executive backing does not mean anything, correct? Is this making sense to everyone? So evolution would involve our understanding of how Constitution has evolved. In some cases, the evolution looks like broadening from the point of view of citizens. So for example, broadening of Article 19, Article 21. But in some cases, there is also shortening of Constitution. If you look at the Constitution of India, there are a lot of things which have been taken away from us since the time of independence. And a lot of scholars call the Constitution of India has created a rightless citizens. because our rights have been curtailed to that extent that you must have read this line that Constitution gives us right from one hand and takes it away from the another. Correct? So there is both ways, but largely you can say that evolution has been in total net positive for this. Features. What are the important features that you think we should cover over here? Because remember, most of the features are there in the remaining of the syllabus that we saw 10 minutes ago. So what are the features that the syllabus wants us to prepare in this particular line of the syllabus? What are those? Preamble. Excellent. What's your name? Kanish says, preamble. Obviously, preamble is one feature that I think we will be able to cover today. Preamble, and then morality, correct? Morality, yes. So federalism is a separate line in the syllabus. So that's why we are not required to. Fundamental rights. FR is not given anywhere in the syllabus. So we have to cover FRs, DPSPs, and excellent. So these are the aspects that you are required to cover from the point of view of their evolutionary nature. How preamble evolved. What are the current challenges to the preamble? So for example, when preamble says sovereignty, is India really sovereign? When preamble says that India should be democratic, is India really democratic? When the constitution says justice, socio-economic and political in that particular order, have we really provided that in that particular order? Right? So these are, what does it mean to say that fraternity assuring, hello, is it audible? बीच में break हुआ ना थोड़ा सा? Yeah. So fraternity का real meaning क्या है and what are the threats to fraternity? That is the coverage. If you do, only then you will be able to answer all the questions that UPSC might ask from preamble, from FRs, from DPSPs, and fundamental studies. Is this making sense, online people? Am I audible? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then amendments, significant provisions, and basic structure. Obviously, this one line is one lecture probably, which is about covering and understanding the evolution of basic structure doctrine, amendments. What are the important amendments that we should be preparing? We will see to it. Obviously, you know most of them, but from the perspective of mains examination, it is important for us to understand what is the main idea behind, let's say, 42nd constitutional amendment. Can anyone summarize 42nd constitutional amendment for us? Online?
Can be referred as mini constitution.
Okay.
Because it made major changes in the constitution after our independence.
Yeah. Who's this?
Kritika.
Okay. Yes. It can be recognized as mini constitution, but that does not it does not provide the essence of 42nd constitutional amendment. Yeah. So the idea behind 42nd constitutional amendment was to create parliament sovereignty, an extremely centralized state of India with center being all powerful. Correct? It also diluted federalism. So that's why it is essential. Okay. Let's start the discussion and see the historical underpinnings and try to see before that. These are the questions that have been asked in past 10 years. I have boldened the main demand of the question. So you can see that questions on fundamental rights. And what I want to show you is that very easy questions that's what I mentioned in the introduction have been asked. So for example, the basic structure, right to privacy, because current affairs the same year, K.S. Puttaswamy came, constitutional morality, problems of the Supreme Court, right to movement and residence throughout the territory of India are freely available to Indian citizens, but these rights are not absolute. As basic as that. I mean, just the prelims knowledge will be more than sufficient to enable you to write this answer. Right? So very simple. So while preparing for mains, the idea is to prepare everything, including the evolutionary dimension, historical underpinnings of the Indian Constitution. First, let's have a look at the question that we will practice in 10 to 15 minutes from now. Read the question and dissect it for all of us. Discuss the legitimacy and representativeness of Constituent Assembly of India to frame a written constitution for independent and sovereign India. What is the main demand of the question? Anyone raise your hands from the back? What does it mean? Yeah. Historical underpinning तो topic ही है.
Sir,
Legitimacy, yes.
we have to highlight the features of the constitution.
Obviously not. Where does it says that we have to highlight the features of the constitution? No. Yes. No. What's your name? Acha, Kanish. No, Kanish. Yeah. What's your name? Manmeet. Manpreet. What Manpreet says is the right understanding of the main demand of the question. What she says is that whether the Constituent Assembly of India was the rightful entity, legitimacy. So this is the first technical term. What do you mean by legitimacy? What is the legitimate authority? Who is the legitimate authority to frame the constitution for free and sovereign India? And the questions about the legitimacy or whether the Constituent Assembly was a rightful entity are very obvious and very natural. You cannot deny some of the facts that we'll see, which can corrode and take away any kind of legitimacy with the Constituent Assembly. We'll see that. So the main demand of the question is that you have to agree and disagree whether the Constituent Assembly and the people who were the members of Constituent Assembly, whether they were the right set of people to frame the constitution for all of us, to the extent that constitution starts with we the people of India. And the obvious question is who the we the people is, because you were not there, my grandparents were not there. I don't think anyone of our grandparents or their parents were a part of the process of writing the constitution. So completely disconnected from the larger mass from whom the constitution was to be imposed, there was no representation at all. Correct? That is the obvious question. It is said that Indian constitution of today is a replica of Government of India 1935. This is one of the dimensions, right? So we have to show whether really it is a copy paste, whether it is really heavily borrowed from the constitution of Government of India Act 1935. Yeah, shut it down. Critically analyze the assertion that Indian constitution is un-Indian or anti-Indian. Why do you think that question has arisen? What is the main demand of the question? No, not really the legitimacy. The lack of legitimacy is one part of the understanding.
It's a borrowed
Because,
constitution.
yeah. So if something is borrowed, you can call it un-Indian. Can you go as far as to say it anti-Indian? Because there's a difference between saying un-Indian and anti-Indian. There's a huge difference between saying something is anti-Indian and un-Indian. So the fact that we borrowed a lot of the provisions from different constitutions of the world is suffice to say that it is un-Indian. What leads us to believe that it could be in some cases anti-Indian as well?
Whether is it
Maybe.
accommodated to present Indian conditions?
Wait a second. Yeah. Limitations like what? Okay. Purnima, come again, please.
Is it accommodative to Indian conditions or not?
Yeah. Okay. Accommodative to Indian conditions. We'll see what are the questions. Emergencies. Yeah. Yes.
Lot is on Government of India Act 1935.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, Government of India Act would not lead you to say, call it an anti-Indian. Anyways, highlight the most important achievements and some of the limitations of Indian Constitution. Although this question should have been done towards the end of the constitutional discussion, but because you have qualified prelims and you have the larger understanding of overall idea of constitution, what do you think are the most important achievements of the Indian Constitution? It has stayed for such a long time. Okay. Kanish? State cannot take away fundamental rights. That is an achievement. Okay. Who is this? Yes. What's your name? Pradeep, batao. Reservation for women. 74 साल लगा दिए तुमने रिजर्वेशन देने में. अचीवमेंट मान रहे हो इसको तुम अपना? Ask the women around. Anyone online? Universal adult franchise. Chirag, very nice.
Sir, elections.
Yeah, Kirtana.
Elections.
Elections, how can that be an achievement? Chirag, why do you think universal adult franchise is an achievement?
Because even then, it was not present in most of the European countries.
That is what an achievement looks like.
So
That
free and
you,
fair.
the constitution gives something that is not even available to the citizens of the developed world. So in 1950, most of the developed world did not give women voting rights. America very recently had given women voting rights. In fact, to the extent that most of the developed world did not extend it to beyond white people, Caucasian people, African American community, non-white people. The voting rights were not available. To a very, very late extent, voting rights were limited by property, education, and wealth. And Indian constitution did not apply these conditions when it came to participation in a democratic procedure. And that's the radical nature of the Indian constitution. That is one of them. Very nice, Chirag. Very good. But we'll see many other. And so the idea over here is that when a question is asked in the mains, you should not be reproducing features of the Indian constitution, which is what you are likely to believe because you have read Lakshmikant. And so there is a chapter in Lakshmikant which says features of the Indian constitution. So when the achievements and features, they're different. All the features cannot be achievements, correct? Just because they have found a place in the constitutional text does not mean that they are achievement of any sort. So for example, creation of all India services, would you call it as an achievement? You should call it as an achievement. Out of all the people, yeah, okay. Critically examine the merits and demerits of a codified constitution in the context of governance and democracy. Illustrate your answer with relevant examples. Why do you think that is a part of this particular line of the syllabus, which is the first line, historical underpinnings? Anyone? Online?
Maybe because British had a continuous constitution. That's why. Because they were borrowing from British and USA. That's why they were like, there's a
No, not comparison. Yeah. So what you're saying is partially true because ours is a codified written constitution. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, the question was, why are we discussing? And the reason why we are discussing is ours is a codified constitution. And so you should have a fair amount of idea as to really codification helps, or because we are in India, we are likely to believe that writing down the supreme law of the land is always beneficial. It is not. And that's all what the question demands. And discuss the interplay between constitution, constitutionalism, and constitutional morality in ensuring the survival and efficacy of the constitution. What is the main demand of the question over here? I'm not asking you to write down the answer. This is basic English. Let me know the main demand of the question. What do you understand by? Yeah. Ethics, ethics, integrity, and aptitude. What do? They give you, if you use these three words, you get good marks in ethics. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the question is, what is the main demand? What the examiner would like to see in your answer over here? Yeah. So first, you should be able to define what constitution is, what constitutionalism is, and what constitutional morality is. And the three, क्या हो गया? Fan opera. Three corners of this triangle basically ensure the survival of the constitution. And you will see that in India, the constitution has survived for more than 70 years is reason that all three virtues are present to some extent in India. That's why our constitution has survived. So for example, one of the first constitutions, except American constitution, did not survive, French Republic. 5 times they have rewritten the constitution, right? So it's not easy to write down a constitution and let it survive. It takes more than what you think. Okay, is this largely the idea is clear? Okay, so these are the 5 questions. Apart from that, we have 4 questions in preamble that we will understand. Okay, let's start the question discussion. How much time have we taken? Okay, we have time. Historical underpinning of Indian constitution. And the first thing that we identified was the Constituent Assembly, right? Whether the Constituent Assembly, forget about कहाँ से कॉपी हुआ, क्या कॉपी हुआ, पैचवर्क है कि नहीं है, कॉपी पेस्ट है कि नहीं है, ठीक है? उससे भी पहले, the people who are, let's say, even if you believe that they are copy pasting, who gave them the right to copy paste, even if it were on behalf of all the Indians, correct? And so that is very important question to be asked. That is an important question to be asked because this is not any ordinary lawmaking exercise. The people who sat down there, they were out there to write down a constitution for free, sovereign, and independent India, right? And if they are not seen as a credible people, if they were not seen as legitimate set of people, if they were deprived of representativeness, then the text that they would lay down would have no value in the lives of day-to-day lives of Indians. Do you understand? Is this making sense? You follow the orders of only those people you consider respected in your life. You don't listen to anyone else, right? And so the question is even more deep than you think, is because since 1930s, the Congress, and particularly Gandhi, had made it explicitly clear that the Constitution of Free India shall be written by Constituent Assembly that shall be elected on the basis of universal adult franchise. In fact, Gandhi in a speech famously remarked that the Constitution of India will not be the parting gift of the Britishers. जैसे बुआ आती हैं जाती हैं आपको 500 रुपए देती हैं, मतलब वो वेरी कर सकता है. पार्टिंग गिफ्ट वो होता है जाते जाते कुछ दे दिया. और एक्चुअली क्या हुआ, ब्रिटिशर्स ने हमें जाते जाते कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन दे दिया. That was exactly how it turned out to be in 1947, because if you look at it, the questions are really the questions that are levied, or the charges that are levied on Constituent Assembly are in fact actually factually true. It was indeed the parting gift. It was a parting gift because first and foremost, the Constituent Assembly was set up by an act of the Parliament of United Kingdom. So the United Kingdom Parliament passes a law, Independence of India Act 1947, which creates the Constituent Assembly. So it is a parting gift, right? So for a sovereign nation, you have to create a Constituent Assembly, but there is another nation which passes the law to create it. And so that's the first question: how can Independence of India Act? Yeah, the plan was, in fact, the membership of the Constituent Assembly was determined by another British provision on the basis of Cabinet Mission Plan. So the Cabinet Mission Plan and the actual effecting of the both of them take away the credibility from the Assembly. And so when the Constituent Assembly was really legislating the Constitution, a lot of the people in India were writing articles as to how can we consider this as really legitimate authority to frame the Constitution for us. So this is just about legitimacy, one of the reasons. But there were questions about representativeness also. The questions about representativeness were equally detrimental for the health of the coming Indian Constitution. So for example, how do you think the people who were the members were chosen? From the assemblies. So they were chosen not on the basis of universal adult franchise, but first on the basis of very limited franchise. So look what Congress had talked about for last 25 years. And when it actually started the process of finding the members to fill the Constituent Assembly, limited franchise on the basis of, again, like West, education, property, income, to the extent that only 5% of the people had the right to vote in 1945-46. 95% people were not even in the consideration while electing the member. Also, the problem is that of a problem of mandate. Another technical word you can directly use is the question of mandate. Who understands what mandate means? No. Authority? No, mandamus, mandate. So for example, when there were general elections, when you went out to cast the vote, you knew that whoever would be the winner will become the member of the parliament. Suddenly, let's say, if you go to cast the vote, the same member becomes the member of legislative assembly. Will it not shock you? And that is the conflict of mandate that happened. The people who chose the members of constituent assembly, they were chosen by the members of legislative assemblies. And when these members of legislative assemblies were chosen, they, at that point of time, there was no conversation about whether they will have the power to elect the members for constituent assembly also. So when back in 1945, when the last provincial elections were held, the legislative assemblies around the states, around all the provinces of Britishers were populated, and suddenly another mandate is given to them. Okay, you can also elect the members of constituent assembly. This is the violation of mandate. When they came to the people, they did not say that 3 years down the line, they will become the people who will also choose the constituent assembly members for all of you. And that's another problem. Because our grandparents gave vote in 1945, even though 5%, that these people will make very limited number of laws on very limited number of subjects for our own states. That was the mandate given to them back in 1945. But then this is a violation of mandate. You take a mandate to make state laws, and then you suddenly start choosing members of constituent assembly. That's problematic. Also, in any kind of a democratic setup, multi-party system is generally respected. Contrary to that, Churchill and along with other people criticized the constituent assembly for assembly of Brahmins, and it was a one-party assembly because almost everyone was a Congress member, right? On top of that, if you look at how constitution has evolved over a period of last 74 years, probably the only written constitution in the world which has gone through more than 100 amendments in less than 70 years. And so the question is that if you have to carry out amendments of your own constitution more than 1.3 times per year on an average, obviously it means that the constitution, there's something wrong with the making of the constitution. Is this making sense to everyone? So that is, yeah. But then we have a long constitution, that's true. But other long constitutions are also not as frequently amended as Indian constitution. Yeah, there are multiple reasons, but you cannot deny the fact that the Constitution of India is amended. So for example, American Constitution has been amended only 38 times. Random. 20 times in last 250 years. So they have to carry out an amendment every 12 and a half years. Whereas every year we carry out 1.5 times amendment, correct? And that's a problem. So multiple amendments. Also, the fact that people say that we would have still been fine with the issues that we see over here if the final constitution was put for referendum, which is generally the case with other constitution writing experiments carried out across the globe, where let's say if you are not able to include everyone in the writing constitution process, what happens is that not everyone can be included. That's a practical problem that constitution writings across the globe face. But what they decide is that after the constitution has been written down, it can be put for referendum. And if people accept it, then all the problems would have gone away. The problem is that Indian constitution was not put for referendum. And that is something you will not see anywhere in the world for supreme law of the land. So even if in a country there is no direct democracy, they are not going to put all the laws for day-to-day referendum. But if they are writing constitution, they do it because it has to be accepted by everyone, most of the people, right? And so these are the questions which raise very genuine concerns related to the legitimacy of the Indian constitution and its representativeness, which obviously creates a problem. The question is that if that is the case, How has the Constitution of India come to become or summarize our national identity? How has Constitution of India become a touchstone of the Indian nation? Touchstone का मतलब पता है क्या होता है touchstone? Anyone? What is a touchstone? कीस्टोन तो अलग चीज हो गई, वो तो तुम आर्टिकल कल्चर में चले गए। ट्रू आर्च में कीस्टोन होता है। हाँ, यार्डस्टिक इज नॉट टचस्टोन। हाँ, सिंबल,
रेफरेंस पॉइंट,
रेफरेंस पॉइंट। अरे टचस्टोन की कसम खाते हैं ना, टचस्टोन।
सैक्रेड,
अक्षय,
sacred,
sacred, yeah,
sacred.
yes, you are right. And so the obvious question is that while these arguments are factually correct, it's very difficult to negate it. There are certain philosophical and moral arguments which will make these factual arguments look like a very hobbit, like very small. And what are those philosophical arguments that we can put forward? यही होता है, जब आप फैक्ट से काउंटर नहीं कर पाते हो तो आप आइडियोलॉजी में चले जाते हो, आप फिलोसफी में चले जाते हो, क्योंकि वहां पे फिर फैक्ट्स डोंट मीन एनीथिंग, राइट? What are those philosophical arguments? Okay, it was India was Congress and Congress was India. तुम्हें नहीं बोलना है इस क्लास में. You should not be attending the class also. I have informed everyone from PSIR. Okay. All right. So the first argument about, so if you go back to the question was discuss the legitimacy. So the first part is that you agree that yes, there are questions, you cannot deny the questions. These are factually correct arguments and you have to mention them. But then as an Indian and as an aspirant of civil services, you cannot say, ha, hamara constitution to illegitimate hai, non-representative. You cannot do that also. And obviously, what we are going to discuss is equally true and even more true. Why? Because let's first talk about the representativeness aspect. Representativeness aspect for the first time says that elections were not held to choose the members of Constituent Assembly. The question is, could the elections been held in 1947 and 48 context? What do you require for an election outcome to be truly acceptable? You require institution, you require peace, you require tranquility. But in the context of 1947 and 48, you had partition, you had religious violence, you have the extreme of communalism that India has ever seen. The communalism that you see stands nowhere as opposed to the heightened communalism that we experienced in 1947-48. In that context, without an independent institution to conduct the elections, even if we would have conducted the elections, no one would have accepted the results of those elections. And so practically denying the charges is most easy, is saying that forget about elections, forget about direct or indirect elections. The question is that elections could not have been held. And so there is no question about direct elections. How can you have an election without first establishing an empire for free and fair game? You cannot have a proper game without an empire. So you need to create empire. For that, you need to write a constitution. All right. That is number one. Second is, it says that it was largely a Congress assembly. How far do you agree that it was a largely Congress assembly? Say, na? Huh? Yeah. So when you say that it was a one-party assembly in a one-party country, the opponents say that India was Congress and Congress was India. And obviously, you can look at what the nature of Congress was, right? And then you can truly understand its implications on Constituent Assembly. Do you think Congress was a political movement? Congress, one dimension of the existence of Congress was political, but largely Congress was a social movement. So if you look at a Congress, forget about the leaders that it had all the prominent leaders of that time were the members of Congress. Bose, until very late, was also member of Congress. But if you look at the social movement nature of the Congress, you will realize that if you consider the Congress nature in the form of, let's say, women movement on the basis of gender, after the arrival of Gandhi, the participation of women in Congress was very high. Because especially Gandhi, when he said that the official policy of the Congress would be non-violence, it sort of emboldened women in a patriarchal setup. Ki chalo, there is a kind of movement we can participate in a patriarchal setup. Not that women cannot participate in guerrilla warfare, but it is difficult in a patriarchal setup. If you look at what are the social movements that you require on the basis of class, you had peasant movement under the garb of Congress. To the extent that by 1930s, it became really difficult to really distinguish between as to what is a Kisan Sabha rally and what is a rally organized to demand nationalist movements, nationalist demands. Because you go to a rally and you see Nehru addressing Kisan Sabha. What that rally stands for? Nehru all the while is talking about peasant reform, land reform, the problem of tillers, challenges created by zamindars. And the Britishers cannot do anything because he is really addressing peasants about peasants' concern. He is not talking anything about British. So that is the difference that you see between 18th to 19th century peasant movement, where they were localized. They did not have any consciousness about the colonialism. So they were very isolated. They were very temporary in their demands. But as soon as 20th century arrives, because of Gandhi's widened horizons, peasant and nationalist causes get united to each other and it becomes really difficult to decouple them. So what is the cause for peasant becomes the cause for nationalist movement. What is the cause for nationalist movement become a peasant movement. Both of them realize, peasants also realize that the cause of the problem is not that we are farmers. The problem is that we are farmers under a colonial government. That was not the realization in 19th century. So they understood that if India becomes independent, our problems would be resolved. That you will see in Baswa sir classes, it has not been resolved so far. That's why nationalists are criticized by the communists कि ये भी काटते हैं, सब काटते हैं, right? सब अपना फायदा उठा के प्राइम मिनिस्टर बन के निकल लिए 15 साल. Similar is the case is that industrial workers sitting on the same platform as their owners, capitalists, sitting on the same platform as tribals. So while you will read tribal movements in 19th century, in 20th century, tribal movements also get combined with the nationalist cause. And that's when you really broaden the horizon and representativeness of the Congress itself. Because of their outlook towards lower caste, not to the extent Ambedkar would have liked, but Gandhi made sure that he talks about Kali Paraj, that you must have heard in your books. And that also transitioned the Congress nature from largely upper caste, middle caste, urban elite, like, name some. उससे भी पहले फिरोज शाह मेहता, इन लोग की अपनी ट्रेन्स चलती थी, पता है आप लोग को ये? They had their own trains. They were so rich. And yes, and then yes, and from that you transition to an era where Rajendra Prasad, Vallabhbhai Patel, these people from lower caste, lower class, agrarian society come to dominate the affairs of the Congress. They are the members of Congress Central Working Committee. You cannot name a single lower caste person as a president before 1920. You can name N after that. At least in the Congress Working Committee, that's a huge reformation. And with every such group aligning with the Congress gets aligned with the nationalist cause, broadens the horizon and creates a rainbow-like coalition for Congress, where you name a cause and you have that representation within Congress. Forget about Constituent Assembly. But this is just about social movement. You will undermine the nature of the Congress. Just the fact that you look at the social movement if you do not look into another very potent force in political science, which is ideology. Kali Paraj. Kali Paraj is the word, right? Ujali Paraj and Kali Paraj. He used to refer to the lower caste untouchables as Kali Paraj. Untouchables as Kali Paraj. Yeah. Okay. Look at ideology. What is ideology? Can anyone define ideology? Yeah, you. मुझे लगा वो बोल रहा है. An idea to gain political power or strength is an ideology. And why is ideology important in this discussion? Because every kind of idea moves a certain groups of people and aligns them with the cause. So for example, today, not everyone supports BJP. Right? That is clear in the results also. Correct? Why don't you think everyone supports BJP? Because they do not align themselves with the ideas of BJP. Similarly, a lot of people do not agree with Congress, right? Because they do not see themselves aligned with the ideas of the Congress or what Congress wants to do after they gain the power, right? And in the political sphere, it is very important to define your ideology very well. Otherwise, you will end up like Aam Aadmi Party, correct? And because they're just confused set of people. And so, look at how beautifully Congress crafted its constitution in such a way that it does not exclude even a single idea. And probably the only party in the existence so far that I know of that allowed double membership. Can you think of becoming the district president of BJP at the same time state president of Congress today? नहीं हो सकता ना. ऐसे सोचने हंसी आ रही है. ऐसा हुआ है. Communist Party के leaders have been the member of the Congress Party, and that too prominent people. Look at, and if you do not understand what communism looks like, read about what Communist Party and its values stand for. They are inherently opposed to nationalists. But Congress said, no, we are not threatened by you as long as we are not independent. जब हम independent हो जाएंगे तब तुम्हें जेल में डाल देंगे, वो कोई बात नहीं है. लेकिन जब तक हम independent नहीं हो रहे, तब तक there is no problem. You know, A.K. Gopalan was a communist leader, and he was put in jail the day India got its own constitution. And that is how you have a famous case of A.K. Gopalan versus Union of India. Yeah. And so initially the Congress was moderate, constitutionalist. Talking about constitution, yeah, constitutional reforms. Their idea of independence was very similar to Canada or Australia, कि हम independent हो जाएंगे लेकिन crown के under रहेंगे. Correct? इनसे बात नहीं बनी. Then we have extremist turn. Correct? People who want to take the movement to the mass level, engage commoners into the movement, which moderates did not like. So we had a split of Congress. For some time they decayed. And then arrives a person who is already very old and very stalwart in political stature, because he has already done a lot of stuff in South Africa. So he brings along that credibility on the table. By the time he comes to India, he's already 50, as opposed to other prominent leaders who were like in 30s and 40s. And so what he says is that I have designed some tricks which you should follow. And after that, look at the kind of wide spectrum that is allowed to coexist on the platform of Congress. So you had conservatives, right-wing politicians like Madan Mohan Malviya, coexisting with probably the two ends of the spectrum: communist, Marxist, socialist, and another end of spectrums also liberals. All of them coexisted together. And so when you say that it was a one-party assembly in one-party country, you can deny those charges by simply saying that all the ideologies that existed in India existed in Congress, found its place in the Congress. Any kind of group that existed in India and demanded social justice had its representation within the Congress. And so if you have a party that itself symbolizes like a parliament, why do you raise those questions? They stand no chance of. Is this making sense? Is this clear to everyone? The nature, the wide spectrum of the Congress in terms of interests articulation. Another keyword. What is interest articulation? Put your interest forward. In politics, to be able to articulate your interest is very important. If you are not able to frame your demands properly, and so you required direct elections, universal adult franchise, so that you could have represented everyone. That was the idea, right? Here you are representing all the interests. You are representing the interests of women, lower caste. You are representing the interests of the tribals. You are representing the interests of industrial workers, peasants. And also, you have all the ideologies as well represented in the Constituent Assembly. So why is there a question on legitimacy and the representativeness of the Constituent Assembly to frame the Constitution? Is it making sense? Right? And so this is one of the most forceful argument against the, and so you can easily say that, yeah, it also, when the National Commission to review the working of the Constitution was set up, it recommended no major changes in the Constitution. And this was set up by NDA BJP government in 2001. And it did not recommend any wholesale outright changes, barring few artificial shallow modifications here and there. Which means that if a commission is set up after 50 years and it does not recommend any major changes, it means that everything is fine. Yeah. So that's what the question is. Also, some of the procedures that they adopted while finalizing the Constitution leaves the referendum idea useless. Every important provision before being included was put to vote. Unanimous. It was not put to vote, never. It was on the basis of consensus. If there is one person that has a veto, so everyone in the Constituent Assembly had a veto. So if one person disagrees with with an amendment, that provision will not be included. So if you have such a substantive democratic process to create a constitution, why do you need a referendum? Is this making sense? Yeah. So these are the both sets of arguments. Okay. So about the Constituent Assembly, but we are not yet done with the charges, other charges that exist. The other charges are, the first is that it is borrowed. And what leads you to believe that it is a borrowed constitution? What leads you to believe that it is a borrowed constitution? Huh? Preamble seems borrowed. Yeah. So what are the provisions? NCRT, standard. NCRT bol raha hu. NCRT also in Lakshmikant. You have a table which tells you the name of the countries and what are the provisions that we have borrowed. Quickly tell me all of the provisions because I don't remember. What have we borrowed from UK? Parliamentary system, rule of law, very good. Online people, you should participate. Equality before the law, yeah. Rule of law, equality before the law. Yeah, so parliamentary system, parliamentary privileges. USA, yeah, Bill of Rights, equal protection
Judicial
clause,
independence.
judicial independence or review, yes. Then Canada, Australia,
Appointment of Governor,
Irish.
Canada.
correct. Irish Constitution,
DPSP.
very nice. DPSP. So we have borrowed a lot from these constitutions. And so also we have borrowed heavily, relied heavily on Government of India Act. What have we taken from there? Very nice. Administrative machinery also. So the entire steel frame along with the non-steel concrete has been borrowed. So administrative setup and federal structure mainly. Huh?
Provisions, emergency provisions.
Emergency provisions, correct. So emergency
Public
provisions have
service.
already. So
Public
if the
service.
question is, if the question on the table is that Indian Constitution is a borrowed constitution, critically analyze. So obviously you will have to write all this first. You should, so this is just a prelims level knowledge. Yes, these are patchworks. The question is how far that is true. डू यू अग्री? हाँ हाँ, कॉपी वर्क है, अग्री करते हैं, ठीक है, काम सही कर रहे हैं, क्या फर्क पड़ता है? इंपोर्टेड गाड़ी खराब थोड़ी होती है, खराब होती है क्या? तो फिर ऑनलाइन पीपल, so do you agree? So should we conclude at this point that this is just a borrowed constitution? I agree.
So they've been modified as per the Indian context,
Perfect.
like
Who is this?
so Gaurav.
Gaurav. Yeah,
Yes.
acha, I can see you. Sorry.
So
So
for
Gaurav says
example,
that. Gaurav says that. Yeah, yeah.
so for
Go ahead.
example, like
Sorry.
separation of power. So
Yeah.
in Indian context, it is between the judiciary and there is a less separation of power between the executive and the parliamentary.
Yeah, but then that is how it is in UK also.
But that standard
That
concept we
is
have not taken.
that is a core of parliamentary system, that you do not have real separation of power between executive and legislature. The first thing is that you should always start any charges that are levied in such case, un-Indian, patchwork, copy-paste, heavily on the provisions of the main constitution. If there is anything, you have to start your argument by quoting this sentence by Ambedkar, where he says that one likes to ask whether there can be anything new in the constitution formed at this hour in the history of the world. More than 100 years have rolled over. When the first written constitution was drafted, it has been followed by many countries reducing their constitutions to writing. What the scope of a constitution should be has long been a settled debate. Similarly, what are the fundamentals of the constitution are recognized all over the world. Given these facts, all constitution in their main provisions must look similar. The only new things, if there can be any in a constitution framed so late in the day, are the variations made to remove the faults and to accommodate it to the needs of the country. So it's like these charges are not new and they come in examination often is because Ambedkar had to say this in the Constituent Assembly debate, because when people were saying, "Arey, आप तो बस उधर जाते हो, 15 दिन के लिए लेके आते हो और हमें दिखा देते हो." So he said that experiments have been done all across the globe. There is no need, there is no scope for experimentation. There are two main kinds of systems. One is presidential, one is parliamentary. We went through a debate. We identified the merits and demerits of both of them, and we understood that parliamentary system seems like a logical system because of, we'll discuss later on, various factors, discuss that. Now, we are not here to do experimentation. We are not a startup lab. We should choose from what has been done and what has been rejected. So how will you, so after writing these points that the charges are true to some extent, you should start by, but as Dr. B.R. Ambedkar stated in the Constituent Assembly debate, that all the constitution in their main provision should look similar. So this is not a charge that there is a car, तो उसमें 4 wheels होंगे यार, मतलब उसमें just you cannot say कि there's 4 wheel है, इसमें एक steering है, तो ये तो कॉपी कर लिया आपने, ऐसे थोड़ी होता है, कार तो कार होती है, right? तो वो basic provision में तो same होगी ना. Okay, so that is the number one point in mains that you are going to write, as Dr. Ambedkar himself denied the charges by saying that. Is it clear? And then you have to talk about modifications to deny the charges that they are blatant copy paste, जो हम करते थे अपने projects के assignments में college में, वैसा नहीं है वो. How will you prove that? The question is that how will you prove that how modifications have been carried on? So for example, from USA, when we took Bill of Rights, we modified them to provide for defenses against the societal violations of the rights also, which is not there in US. Because it was understood that the rights in India would never be violated by the state, it would be violated by the society in the form of caste system. Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yes. So what you have to do is that you have to mention the provision and then you have to talk about the modifications done. So Bill of Rights taken from there, modified to suit to Indian circumstances. We'll see in detail in fundamental rights how we have modified the idea, a liberal idea, to give rise to a communitarian idea. Then when we took equal protection, the Constitution of US does not constitutionalizes the equal protection. That's why the Supreme Court of US was able to take away the equal protection from African American community. But we not only mentioned it in Article 14, we provided in 15, we provided in 16, and we also provided it in article starting from 330 to 342, where we provided affirmative action in political representation. That is the modification. When we took federalism, we did not go for American, Canadian, Australian. We provided asymmetric federalism. If you look at American Constitution, all the states are equidistant from Washington, D.C. So if there is a state, this is a center, and if you say that states are less powerful, which they are not, but just for the sake of convenience, then all the states, if it's California, it could be Texas, it could be Minnesota, all of them are the same level, share the same power. If you draw the corresponding map of India, if this is New Delhi, UP, Bihar share the same power, but until very recently, Jammu Kashmir was very close to Delhi in terms of autonomy. Nagaland is very close to Delhi in terms of autonomy. It does not share this power in the same way that UP and Bihar share the power with New Delhi. That is the modification we have done. So we have not copy pasted. What we have done can be in one word summarized. That becomes your second point heading is creative adaptation. These are the creations which are wholly Indian in nature, which later on being copy pasted in other constitutions. Because what has ensured the survival of India as a union, as a nation, is the creative adaptations, the changes made to the provisions which already existed to suit to Indian situations and Indian requirements. Is this making sense, everyone? Yeah. And so the provisions like these, so we'll look at the answer. All these points will be there. Also, the fact that it is called an un-Indian or anti-Indian constitution, what do you have to say about that? Constituent Assembly debate में लोग इतने इमोशनल हो जाते थे. One person rose up and says towards the end of the discussion that, oh, we wanted to hear the music of Veena and Sitar, and what we have is a music of English orchestra. अरे सीधे सीधे बोलो anti-Indian बोल रहे हो, un-Indian बोल रहे हो. मतलब this is a way of emotional speech. Why do you think that is the case? The Government of India Act, obviously, but un-Indian, anti-Indian to begin with. Exactly.
Some colonial provisions were retained. you
Yeah.
can say.
So borrowed wala clear ho gaya answer. Even if it is 15 marker, we can write it. Let's come to un-Indian, anti-Indian. So you can understand that while answering, this will become a component of this answer. While saying it is an un-Indian constitution, you will have to say that heavily borrowed and copy pasted. Why it would be anti-Indian is because what Divyansh says is that it removed the core belief of the father of the nation, which was democratic decentralization, Panchayati Raj. And forget about being enforceable in nature or not, it was put to the voluntary part of the constitution, which was unenforceable, which was DPSP. The question is that the person, probably the only person who is fit enough to find his face on the banknotes, you can understand कि अगर let's say tomorrow we say कि चलो किसी एक आदमी को और लेते हैं, मुझे नहीं लगता किसी पे agreement बनेगा. That person has such a high level of acceptability. That person was responsible for creating a coalition within the Congress to get the support from all the groups, all the ideologies. And what he believed, his idea of state, which was so central to his understanding of the society, उनके जाने के बाद आपने कहा वो तो गए, अब छोड़ो, अब तो एक यूनियन क्रिएट करते हैं जहां खुद प्राइम मिनिस्टर बनेंगे. क्यों? क्योंकि डेमोक्रेटिक डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन, इफ इट वुड हैव हैपेंड द टाइम ऑफ नेहरू, ही वुड नॉट बी अ पावरफुल प्राइम मिनिस्टर. राइट. एंड सो बाद में जब होगा तब देखा जाएगा, वो उनकी टेंशन है, हम तो नहीं करेंगे. एंड दैट्स व्हाई when the constitution was being finalized, a lot of people got emotional that Panchayati Raj there is no mention of Panchayati Raj in the Constitution of India. And that's why it was labeled as anti-Indian. And so, obviously, again, just like the previous, these are also true charges. So, कुछ तो सपोर्ट में कहना पड़ेगा अपने कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के, तो क्या कहोगे? एंटी-इंडियन, बट अन-इंडियन में तो ये सारा डिस्कशन आ गया ना. अन-इंडियन, एंटी-इंडियन. dens of discrimination. Yeah. No, not Panchayati Raj, but do you agree that Indian constitution is anti-Indian or un-Indian? No. Why do you say that? No से तो काम चलेगा नहीं मेंस में. Yeah, DPSPs में mention होना is or has had no value back then. Has a lot of value after harmonious construction.
We were not ready at that time, sir.
Akshay, एक मिनट wait करना. We are not talking about DPSPs. We are not talking about Panchayati Raj. We are coming back to the main question as to what you will write if the question is critically discuss if Indian constitution is anti-Indian or un-Indian. वो तो आ गए लेकिन इसके काउंटर में क्या बोलोगे? मॉडिफाई किया, ठीक है, लेकिन बिल्कुल वही की कर रहा हूँ, वो सब मॉडिफाई किया, अडेप्ट किया, वो सब तो रहेगा ही मेन पॉइंट्स में. उसके अलावा कुछ पॉइंट्स everyone has something to look for in the constitution. Very good. इसको कैसे रिफ्रेश करोगे? ऐसे तो नहीं लिखोगे ना, everyone has something to look for in the constitution. That's a very nice line. Yes. There was someone online who was saying something. I stopped him. Come again, please. Akshay,
Sir,
I think it was you.
Sir,
Yeah.
we were not ready at that point of time for decentralization.
We were not ready for decentralization.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you think we can give power to everyone? Yes, at the back. Yeah. You are again going for deep. That is not the main. Let's go to the question and see what we are trying to achieve over here. Does the legitimacy? मुझे लगता है थोड़ा सा मैंने वो yes. अब ये क्वेश्चन है, अब इसका आंसर करो चुपचाप. बार बार पंचायती राज में भाग जा रहे हो. ये नेशनल लैंग्वेज कैसे आ गई? नेशनल लैंग्वेज है कहाँ इंडियन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन में? There are official languages and then there are 8 scheduled languages. There is no national language in India. Yeah, okay. Critically analyze the assertion that Indian constitution. So, okay, let's start writing this. Obviously, you will start with an intro. What is the main demand of the question? Is whether it is un-Indian. And then you will write all the points, right? Obviously mentioning anti-India. And then the argument is no. Why? Number 1, obviously Ambedkar argument. Number 2, modifications. Number 3, number 4, creative adaptations. Then, if it were un-Indian, would it become the part of the national identity that it has become? If it were un-Indian, as Ashish mentioned, would it become touchstone? Or even that matter, every kind of socio-economic, political debate ultimately becomes the debate around the constitution. ये तभी हो सकता है जब constitution represents Indian society. आपको रिजर्वेशन की लड़ाई है, आप सुप्रीम कोर्ट चले जाओ. सुप्रीम कोर्ट अगर आपके फेवर में इंटरप्रेट कर देगा 15, तो हमको दे देंगे. The fight is not whether what is true or what is false. It is around the constitution and the interpretation of the constitution, which means constitution is central to our understanding of all socio-economic political disputes. If you have a demand of autonomy, the Constitution of India says, we will provide you with 5th schedule. Not happy? 6th schedule. Not happy? Create a different state. Not happy? Okay, we will create a separate state under Article 371 A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. We'll create a special provision and look at what Constitution of India does. It goes to such a large extent to accommodate regional diversity. That's what Ashish said, is that everyone finds its manifestation in the Constitution of India. So debate around reservation settled around Constitution, debate around regional identity settled around Constitution, debate around religious affairs settled around Constitution. So there is no debate in India without Constitution, to the extent that wherever you have a political debate, both Sambit Patra and the other side would say, this is what Constitution says, Constitution supports my argument. The other side will say, no, constitution supports my argument. How can that happen? It can happen only when constitution is, forget about un-Indian, let's not talk about anti-Indian, it is absolutely Indian. If it were not, then people would make no references to the Constitution of India at all. Is this making sense? And so that's why the Constitution of India has been created to probably the very rare set of constitutions where the revolution does not result in the writing of the Constitution. The Constitution tries to give rise to revolution. And that's very unique. In China, you had the revolution. Everything was set to zero. Communist Party had the full opportunity to write whatever they wanted to write, and they created a new constitution. You can go across the globe and you will find in US, they defeated Britishers and they had the opportunity to rewrite everything from the basic, from the scratch. In India, what we say is that there is no revolution, there is a transfer of power. Britishers left almost peacefully. They handed over the administration to the Indian counterparts. And because you do not have a revolution, how do you create a revolution? You create a revolution by first writing down revolutionary provisions in the Constitution. Right? So next 2 classes will be spent to understand what are those revolutionary provisions. And while creating those revolutions, will you really limit yourself to only Indian values? Knowing fully well, probably the most Indian values have created these problems. And so copy work is not copy work, but another keyword, it is a reflection of universalism. While creating and while aspiring to create the best car in the world, will you limit yourself to the engines made in India? ADAS made in India, tires made in India, or if the idea is to make the best car, what you will do? You will say, bhai, मेरे को सबसे अच्छा engine बता कहाँ मिलता है, मैं वो लेके आऊंगा. Where the best technology that is available, I will fetch that. Which is the best tire manufacturer, steering manufacturer, I'll get that. And so the effort to go for creative adaptation is an effort which reflects the idea of universalism, which is consciously going for universal values of equality, liberty, and fraternity, because these are not French values, although they emerged in France. But just writing them down does not create our constitution as a taken from French constitution. It shows that we are on the same path to universalism as France was, because no one can deny that these are the fundamental values of human existence. Is this making sense? Yeah. So this completes any answer which you will have to say about. So this is the mind map. The detailed notes I will provide separately today, after every class lecture. So Government of India Act borrowed, yes, you know all the provisions. No. Ambedkar's justification, modifications, carbon copy, yes. No. Universal idle franchise, FR, DPSP, modified federal structure, un-Indian or anti-Indian, yes. Distance from Indian society, expelled the core ideas of Gandhi, like emergency provisions were also included, so that's why it is anti-Indian. No. Touchstone, universalism. Is this clear to everyone? Okay, let's try to write down the answer and start with.
Sir, can you
Yeah.
give points for the anti-Indian part? Like why it was called anti-Indian?
Anti-Indian is expelled the core ideas of Gandhi. You become anti-India. You go against Gandhi, you go against India. You include provisions like emergency, you go against India. Why would you create such dictatorial provisions in the constitution
And
of a
sir, how do we
democratic?
counter it? Like the Gandhian values being put on a
You
backstage.
cannot counter Gandhian values, but you can say that later on, as you will see in the answer, that lately we realize, and in 273rd and 74th amendment, we included those provisions also.
When we were ready at a social political level, we
Yes.
implemented them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or yeah. Yeah, as what he mentioned. Yeah. He did criticize, but the question is not whether Ambedkar criticized Gandhi or not. The idea is that Gandhi is more and has been more socially acceptable figure than Ambedkar. Yeah. Okay. अगर ये PSI क्लास होती तो इसमें डिबेट हो जाता, who is more acceptable. Okay, so discuss the legend. Let's see. Let's look at the answers. Churchill, it was. Let's read it quickly so that we can start a new topic. Thank you, Rajvansh. All the points you can see over here. Yeah, as we discussed. The same consensus in NRCWC. It is said that Indian Constitution is a replica. So these are the answers. Departures. Critically analyze un-Indian or anti-Indian. Highlight the important achievements and limitations of the Indian Constitution. What do you think are the most important achievements of the Indian Constitution? Resilience, institutions, strengthened the democracy. No, so for example, let's say this is the first day of the promulgation of the Constitution, which was the day of the first promulgation? 1940, 1950. And you analyze the Bare Act. So you would not know whether democracy will survive or not. You will just look at what exists in the text. You would not see whether it will survive or not. Yeah. So the first point is what Chirag mentioned. Undoubtedly, the first achievement is universal adult franchise. Without a doubt, and the reason that we have discussed are the same. Because at that point of time, for a newly independent India, a colonial country, to give everyone political equality is a radical step. It's great. Now let's start from here and quickly discuss this. Huh?
Secularism.
नहीं, यूनिवर्सल एडल्ट फ्रेंचाइज तो आर्टिकल 324 से आता है. Yeah. एज 1821 भी वहीं से आती है. सेक्युलरिज्म, व्हाट्स योर नेम? संजना से सेक्युलरिज्म. Do you think secularism is radical? Why do you think it's radical? Exactly. Secularism is radical not because of secularism, but secularism, the way it has been concretized in India, in the context of violence that happened, in the context of partition that happened on the basis of religion, not only to provide secularism, but within that secularism, to incorporate protections for minorities is radical. मतलब अभी कह रहे हैं कि वो अलग देश बना के चले गए और आप कह रहे हो हम उनको प्रोटेक्ट भी करेंगे. हाँ करेंगे. It is radical to be able to say that minorities, especially Muslims, will have the right under Article 29 and 30 in the context of 1950 is radical. You're not only providing them safety, but you are providing preferential treatment, and probably very rare example where preferential treatment is provided on the basis of group. And so that is what is called as the conceptualization of group rights. Rights are generally individualistic in nature. You have a right to movement. Your family does not get the right to. Each member of the family gets individually. That is what liberal individualism stands for. But here you say, you come and you create a religious denomination and you will have the right to administer it. That's a radical step. As far as the essential religious practices are concerned, we are not going to interfere. You will have the full right to administer your educational, cultural institutions. And we will not take away that right ever. That is radical. Anyone else? Very good. एक मिनट. आर्टिकल 17 रेडिकल है. चलो ठीक है, मान लेते हैं रेडिकल है, बट मतलब ये तो नेसेसिटी थी. रेडिकल तो नहीं कह सकते इसको.
So Article 32.
Special provisions for J&K or again asymmetric federalism is radical. Achievement है वो. That shows, and more you'll read polity, you understand how far-sighted Ambedkar was. Asymmetric federalism is one such reflection. We have discussed shortly asymmetric federalism.
Progressive realization of some rights like right to privacy, third gender rights.
But that is not something provided in the Constitution, right? DPSP is a limitation. We'll see why. Well, that is a very no citizenship by birth for head of the state. No, Chirag. वो पहला वाला ही तुम्हारा था moment. चला गया.
So provisions for women.
That is a limitation.
Okay.
ओके सो चलो साथ में लिमिटेशन लिखते जाते हैं. तो फर्स्ट तो किसी और चीज के लिए रिजर्व करते हैं. सेकंड लिमिटेशन जो है, लैक ऑफ जेंडर जस्टिस, स्पेशली विथ रिस्पेक्ट टू societal violations of women rights like religious and personal laws. Constitution completely skipped that part, and that's the problem we're facing even 75 years down the line. Correct? That is the limitation, and that is a miss. That is a huge miss by the Indian Constitution. Any other achievements?
So can independence of institutions be considered under this?
No. Yes. Equal protection law is not. I mean, you can say that. Then you can say you can talk about any provision. Common national identity is also not. Can be. Huh? Affirmative action policies. Or then now completes the Article 14 is affirmative action. And what is, yes, what is radical is to ingrain the affirmative action within the Constitution of India. Affirmative action within the Constitution. Not only to talk about preferentially treating the historically deprived communities, but also providing that for within the Constitution is radical. Is this making sense? Okay. Any other limitation? Nahi, integrated independent.
Excuse me,
judiciary.
sir. The
Yes.
gender justice point, but we have this Article 15 में that state can create any special provisions for women.
हाँ तो वही ना, तो स्पेशल प्रोविजन की बात हो रही है जो उनके खिलाफ सोसाइटल डेप्रिवेशंस हो रहे हैं, उसको तो आपने वो नहीं किया ना, खत्म.
But law can do only that far, sir. We can make special
नहीं,
laws.
so for example, when Article 13 says no law custom can violate the provisions of this, right? Religious law says women do not have right to property. So what's the point of including Article 14 within FR, where the Hindu, Muslim, Christian, all laws says that women do not have equal rights or in inheritance? Do you understand the point? Article 13 says no law, bylaw, custom, provision can violate the provisions of this part. Personal laws are the ones which are more close to you. You violate traffic lights, maybe. How often do you violate traffic lights? Some people might violate it more, but generally once or twice in a particular year. If you live in a family, the violations of personal laws are happening on a day-to-day basis. So what is encroaching upon your liberty more? Personal laws, because you interact with your family on a day-to-day basis and you said nothing about it. Yeah. Constitution has Article 25 and 26 1B both have essence of religion. It says in secular affairs, not in the matters of religion, which essentially is essential religious practice. No, it is the same. Essential religious practice as it is has not been mentioned in the Constitution. But if you read Article 26 1 subclause B, you will see that in the matters of religion. So in the matters of religion means essential religious. We'll talk about it when we'll come to Article 26. Okay. So what are the other limitations?
So Parliament's limitation.
Very good. Emergency and preventive detention laws are grave limitations. And also the Indian Constitution has a very, very centralized idea of unity. That is the problem that we still face. It is plagued by the narrow conceptions of unity. And that is what creates the problem with India's federation. You were so obsessed about territorial unity, Akhandata, that you said that governors will be the long arm of the center. And all the problems that you see around federation is mainly because of that one constitutional authority that has been created. That is the obsession to keep India united. Right? So very centralized idea of unity is an overwhelming concern. It's the limitations. You will see, you can read the whole answer to find about, we have discussed most of them. These are the limitations. And the DPSP, as I said, it is a limitation because nowhere, why do you write such rights in a poor country if you do not enforce them? And that's the limitation. Is this clear to everyone? Yeah, let's now move.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, in limitation, can we mention that the affirmative actions are optional for the state? Like there is no, the provisions are like this, that state may do this.
Yeah, but Constitution paves the way for.
Yeah, but it is not basically made compulsory for the state to
Some
make.
provisions are made compulsory. So, for example, political representation is compulsory.
Right. So, and so second,
Yeah.
is for the successor, can we say that we borrowed the provisions but and implemented them successfully? Like
Obviously. That is true
can
for
we put
any.
this point?
That is true for any state initiative.
Can we put this point in the
Definitely, definitely. No, not in. That is not the limitation of the Indian Constitution per se.
Please, sir. I'm saying the second point which I gave. It is for the basically successful.
Yeah.
Success of the Indian Constitution.
Yeah. True.
Right.
All right.
Sir,
What is the question that you see? Yes.
one more point, sir. So
Yeah,
can we
go ahead.
add parliament limitation when it comes to changing of constitution?
That was not the limitation that was provided for in the Constitution. That is an evolution through judiciary. Correct?
Oh, okay.
Yes. Discuss the interplay between Constitution. What is the Constitution? Quickly. We want to start preamble. Fundamental law of the land. What is supreme law of the land? We have discussed this in prelims revision classes. You remember all of that? In prelims QIP, that was the discussion we did in the first class. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, which creates institutions, which defines the relationship between the institutions, correct? Defines the checks and balances, defines the relationship between state and individual. So, for example, a liberal state would define it in terms of rights. A communist state would define it in terms of duties. The relationship between state and individual. That is Constitution. But just writing a Constitution where you have institutions, their functions, their duties, and then would it mean that the Constitution would survive? Why? Because you should understand that the relationship can be defined in any way. Remember that China also has a constitution, Russia also has a constitution, and Hitler's Germany also had a constitution, correct? So it's just not that you write down a constitution first creates a peaceful society, because you can write down the rules in any way you want. And so the idea of constitution writing is always should ideally be subject to the next word that is called constitutionalism. So you're not out there to write any kind of random rules. कि जब जिसको चाहेंगे गोली मार देंगे, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन लिख सकते हो ना, आइडियली लिख सकते हो, किसने रोका है? इट्स अ सॉवरेन बॉडी. Constituent Assembly can frame any set of rules for the independent India or independent nation, but that cannot be the objective of why you carry out such a sacrosanct exercise. And the idea for that is constitutionalism, which is writing down a constitution to create a limited government. And how do you create a limited government? One of the ways through which you limit the powers of the government is that you say that this is an individual and this is an area where state cannot encroach upon. That becomes a bill of right, because the state cannot go very close to the individual, cannot stop you from movement, cannot stop you from saying something, cannot stop you from practicing your religion. Bill of rights, you create small government, you create a limited government, you create weak state. You do not want a very super powerful Leviathan, right? You want a weak structure. Another way to create a limited government is by fragmenting the power into multiple institutions. So one of the ways to create the limited government is to fragment the power horizontally, so as to say that the same set of people who will make laws will not implement them. The Montesquieu idea of separation of power. The people who will enforce the ideas will not have the power to adjudicate on the law enforcement. And so you create executive, legislature, and judiciary. And that is what is called separation of power, also a part of your syllabus. But this is also not sufficient. Because in a parliamentary system, any kind of separation between legislature and executive vanishes, and practically you have judiciary. But then you can find ways to control judiciary also. You can say, सर आप अभी ये अयोध्या जजमेंट दे दो, बाद में हम आपको एनएचआरसी का चेयरमैन बना देंगे, या आपको हम एमपी बना देंगे, या चीफ जस्टिस ऑफ इंडिया becomes the governor of Kerala. Is this making sense? That is also not sufficient because you can always induce. And so what happens is that judiciary often their in-service judgments are being determined by post-retirement opportunities. And so look at what Constitution of India does. Another way to create a limited government is by fragmenting the power vertically. You create two sets of government. Define their areas of operation. तू डिफेंस करेगा, मैं पुलिस करूंगा, दोनों के पास आर्म्ड फोर्सेस हैं. आप पब्लिक ऑर्डर मैनेज कर सकते हो, लेकिन लॉ एंड ऑर्डर मैं करूंगा. आप रेलवे का ध्यान रखना, रोड मेरे पास है. एंड सो बाय fragmenting the areas of administration between two levels of governance is the sure shot mechanism to create the limited government. And in your practical realization in the past 10 years, if you look back, if there is any kind of substantial check on the power of Prime Minister Modi, do you think it has come from legislature? Do you think it has really come from judiciary except for electoral bonds? No, it has come from Mamata Banerjee. Didi. It has come from Kerala's chief minister. It has come from Tamil Nadu's chief minister. It could come from them because we allowed a political space for them to exist. And that could happen because we created federalism, another mechanism. So by fragmenting the power horizontally, you create a weak, limited government. By fragmenting the power horizontally, you create a limited government. But does that ensure survival of a constitution? Does that ensure peaceful, harmonious society? No, not laws. Constitution. So you think that Indian constitution creates constitutionalism? The Constitution of India has provided for limited government. Do you agree? It has fundamental rights, limited government. It has separation of power, limited government. It has federalism, limited government. But the same limited government existed at the time of Indira Gandhi also. And she was able to mold the entire limited government to provide for unlimited, unrestricted, centralized authority to the level of dictatorship. As Dhruv Rathi would have you believe that about to happen now in India as well. The question is that if writing down a constitution is not sufficient, if providing for limited government, encoding the defenses in the constitution is not sufficient, then what is sufficient to ensure a peaceful, prosperous, and perpetual constitution? That is constitutional morality. To the extent that if you were to rate it mathematically, it starts with constitutional morality. England, Britain does not have a written constitution, does not have a constitutionalism, all-powerful parliament. Parliament can do anything. It can take away your life. But has it ever done that? No. Why? Because constitutional morality. They do not have anything, but still they have a very beautiful democratic setup. Is because constitutional morality is such a powerful idea that this was also the topic of last speech of Ambedkar. He said that we have created very good, decent constitution, jo UPSC wale bolenge copy paste. We have encoded the constitutionalism, created a limited government, but there is one thing that I'm warning you. If the Indian society will not be moved by constitutional morality, then this constitution will also not survive. So what is constitutional morality? The values, utmost obedience and subjugation to the values enshrined in the constitution. Reverence to the forms of constitution is constitutional morality. So you can do that without constitution, and if you have a constitution, you must do that. Because if you stop doing that, the constitution and the beautiful provisions will make no sense, and it will collapse in some time. And so he said that constitutional morality will come back to constitutional morality because Supreme Court judgments mentioned it more often than you would like to believe. He said that constitutional morality for the first time breaks down when you have singular claims to the sovereignty, or otherwise in GS you can write hero worship. And that's what happened during the time of Indira Gandhi. So as I said, more you read Polity, the more you have respect for Ambedkar. He predicted Indira Gandhi before Indira Gandhi even was a teenager. Correct. He said that as soon as people are plagued with the virus of hero worship, people would easily keep the values of constitution aside and say, this leader whatever he or she is saying, I'm going to folloवो that to the ignorance, and that's when you have a breakdown of constitutionalism, which renders constitution useless. Gandhi वो अलग बोला. Then he said that we have provided a constitution where almost all kinds of disputes, you can resolve them amicably. You can go to judiciary. If you find problem, judiciary will resolve it. If you think that problem is too big, you can create your political party, and then you can win elections and you can change the constitution and your things done. And so in the free and independent India, there is no scope for something like civil disobedience and non-cooperation. And that's when what Ashish said, he criticized Gandhi that look what damage you have done. By that time, he was already passed. What damage he had done is that he has trained the Indian citizens into civil disobedience. And imagine if people are dissatisfied post-constitutional promulgation, they would just sit down on dharna every day. So if Ambedkar were alive today, he would have disapproved what farmers are doing or did, or NRC and CAA protests. He says that there is no scope. You have a judiciary, go to the Supreme Court. If Supreme Court agrees that yes, it is a violation of Article 14, they will strike down CAA. That is no problem. So he says that all the dispute resolutions should be done according to the constitutional mechanism, not through taking them to the streets. And so he said that ultimately there is a need for patience and toleration, which is a fundamental value of constitutional morality. If citizens are not tolerant about day-to-day happenings, and that's when you see the problems created around law and order because of hate speech. People are not tolerant. Defamation, lack of tolerance. Political and religious violence, caste violence, lack of toleration. And that's when constitution really breaks down. Correct? So that's what determines the survival of, so you will get everything in notes. So discuss the interplay between constitution, constitutionalism, and constitutional morality, ensuring survival and efficacy of a constitution. What is the main demand of the question here? How all three play a role, but which is the most? Morality. We understand why morality is important. If people do not respect the values of the constitution, the last question I think, इसके बाद हम preamble शुरू करेंगे. Yes. Critically examine the merits and demerits of a codified constitution in the context of governance and democracy. You guys are habitual of the classes being extended, right? I've heard this. Yeah. So just 15 minutes delay because these are not foundation classes. So we are running on targets. So because otherwise it will stretch the entire curriculum. Critically examine the merits and demerits of codified. What is a codified constitution? Written constitution where everything can be seen at one place, defined as the constitution of a country A. The question is, do you really think there are demerits of a codified constitution? You obviously know the merits. What are the merits of codified constitution? Oh, not every country would provide separation of power. It does not say codified constitution generally. Limitation, excellent. Rigidity is a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing. Yeah. So then you would not frame it in the merits. Correct. Yes. So when you write down the constitution, the first thing you do is that certain core values of the constitution are removed from the day-to-day transient majority. So for example, let's say BJP wants to, NDA wants to change something with fundamental rights. Can they do it? Yes. ऐसे कैसे? They cannot, because for that you would require to carry out the procedures defined in Article 368. For that you need half and 2/3. You do not have that majority. While when it comes to normal ordinary lawmaking, you can do that. So the day-to-day majority cannot tweak with the core values. Can they remove the position of the governor? They cannot. For that, they will require the approval by more than half of the states. Can they change the power of Supreme Court? They cannot. Certain core fundamentals of the constitution. This is also one of the first starting point of basic structure. that we'll see in Keshwananda Bharti case. Certain core values are removed from day-to-day transient majority and they cannot be tweaked, and it makes the constitution safe. Certain core fundamental is safe. Second, पहले साउंड कर रहे थे फिर स्टेटमेंट नहीं बोलता है, सोच लिया अगर frame it. Okay, so a codified constitution generally has a judiciary. So generally, the judicial review ensures that parliament never encroaches the boundaries set by the. That is also clear. What it has been observed across the globe is that codified constitutions are generally better in keeping autocracy, dictatorships generally at bay. You would not have accessibility to the constitution. Also, it has a lot of educational value. Once you have all the fundamentals written down in a one text, it becomes very easy to communicate it to the normal people, as opposed to a situation where you'll say, okay, there are 490 set of laws which are fundamental for the governance of UK. Now, what to communicate to the common people? When we talk about polity, we directly say Article 14. You know what it means. In UK, it doesn't mean anything, right? But then what are the demerits? Can they have demerit? Decision making takes a lot of time. The ideas around Nari Shakti, Women Reservation Bill, have been around 20 years. It took 25 years to get that amended because of the difficult process to amend the constitution. GST first talked around in 1998, 1999. The first bill finalized in 2001 comes into action in 2016, 101st constitutional amendment. So it takes around 17 years to build the political consensus because of the requirement of the majorities. And that's why codified constitutions are slow to respond to the changes of the times. The society would have evolved, and then the constitution is lagging by at least 1 or 2 decades to reflect that change, which is not the case with uncodified constitution. They will immediately reflect that change. Any other problem that you see? Yes. Excellent. Excellent. While judicial review for the short time is a good thing, you cannot deny the fact that non-elected judges become the super legislature. And as the problem we'll see, they are often liable to fall prey to the tendencies of judicial activism, overreach, or in some cases, excessivism. They do not follow restraint. Any other problem? ये पेन ठीक नहीं गया यार, इतनी खराब राइटिंग तो नहीं आती मेरी बहुत वैसे ऐसे. Okay. Yeah. Any other problem? Constitution is a political document. So while writing down the constitution, you will consider a lot of political ideas, and then obviously you will prioritize some set of ideas over other. The problem is that the ideas that you prioritize are codified, leaving behind all other political ideas and the followers of those ideas disgruntled. And so what we have seen, that codification, rather than creating peace, more often than not creates violence. Nepal. They finalized the constitution. Until that point of time, they had communist movement. After the finalization of the constitution of Nepal, a lot of the groups in Nepal are not happy. Madhesis, for example, they're perpetually at war with the Kathmandu because of the idea of citizenship that has been incorporated, because they had a lot of choices to choose from. They chose one, and in that, it is revealed that Madhesis are feeling the heat of the new constitution. And so the writing down of the constitution in many cases is the starting point of a new revolution or a war, because you will have A, B, C options. If you choose B, A and C will be dissatisfied. Is this making sense to everyone? Any other demerit that you see with the codified constitution? Quickly. Narrow interpretation of what? Like? Anyone? Online? Rigid? Rigid to amend. Yeah, that's what we said. rigidity, GST and अभी हमने पढ़ा है कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल मोरालिटी. क्या चेंज हो जाता है आशीष? तो फिर तो नहीं, तो चलो मान लो इवोल्यूशनरी नेचर प्रोवाइड किया है, फिर क्या प्रॉब्लम है? यू आर राइट, बट लेट्स से or in the other way, let's say people generally are moved more by social morality, and in that case writing anything and everything becomes useless because of the lack of constitutional morality. So the values of the constitution never really reaches people. And take our examples, we are still moved by caste system. Constitution has abolished it. Constitution has not abolished caste system, but has provided for equality. We do not treat people from all the caste equally. We are not being moved by fraternity. We are not secular in our day-to-day existence. And so what good that exercise of constitution writing is if it has not reached us in 75 years? And that's what codified constitutions face problems across the globe. Is it making sense? Yeah, it is correct. What's your name? Mohit. What Mohit says is the problem of implementation. That is correct. But what we are saying is that you do a lot of extensive research, utilize a lot of resources, take a lot of time to finalize and write down and promulgate a constitution. Then it can't be implemented. That is a demerit. Just difficult. Yes, Yamini, do amend, but difficult to controversial amendments. Yes.
Sir,
Okay.
So can we
Yeah.
say that? So can we say that when we codify the constitution, it is easy to bypass?
It is easy to bypass what?
Like for example, the Supreme Court has not defined the basic structure of the constitution. So every time, whenever it feels, it can put that thing. If it would have defined it in.
Why do you bring basic structure into the discussion?
I'm just giving an example that if
Okay.
everything is, say for example, there are some violations, they are written in the constitution.
There are
If you-
certain provisions that are written in the constitution. Come again?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. There are certain provisions which are written in the constitution. Then you know, okay, these things we cannot do, but other than these things we can do.
Okay.
We can bypass things if we codify.
Everything cannot be written.
Yeah, we can say that.
So interpretation
Acha,
might
so
be a
you're saying
problem.
that if we write down something, then it is easier to find the bypasses or loopholes in the
Yeah,
system.
yeah, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Okay, so do you think that it is better than not writing anything? So probably everything becomes a bypass then.
Yes, but sometimes it helps people to basically justify them.
Okay, sir, we'll carry this out. I don't think you're right. I mean, obviously you can never argue that consensus building constitution that builds upon consensus building will have more loopholes than not writing anything down. I mean, that is just a recipe for dictatorship. That's what I believe.
Right, sir. Right. Just wanted to clarify.
Yeah. So this is the only question that has come from preamble in 2016 so far in last 10 years is discuss each adjective attached to the word republic in the preamble. Are they defendable in the present circumstances? ये दो बार हो गया, patchwork हो गया. Stances. What is the main demand of the question? And why I would tell you we have to discuss preamble in a little bit detail. Analysis of, so the main demand of the question is not that you just have to define what is sovereign, what is socialist, what is justice to nahi aayega, secular, but you have to also examine, are they defendable? Is sovereignty of India defendable now? Is socialism defendable now? Although very briefly, that's a 10 marker. So you just have to write one line. But what it leads me to believe that any day the question can be asked on a specific word mentioned in the preamble. How far do you think sovereignty in Indian preamble has evolved in the context of globalization? Practice question. Discuss the implication of this evolution in India's external and internal sovereignty with relevant examples. Analyze how the concept of democracy has been envisioned in Indian preamble has evolved over time and discuss the relevance of socialism, especially in the context of what is the connection between socialism and LPG? Yeah. It is a neoliberal policy, and then you are saying we are socialists, and then you are saying we are going for privatization. How both of them go together? So is the objective clear of the discussion? Okay, let's now start. We the people of India, is it have you memorized this verbatim? Okay. Solemnly resolved to constitute India. We the people of India. What do you think this shows? What is it? Why do you write we the people of India? Legitimize consensus building. Also, how many of you have heard about Hobbes and Locke? How do you know them? In context to ethics. Social contract. This is a social contract looks like in politicals. This is a social contract. Come in, just write on your face. Otherwise, there is no meaning of writing we the people of India. It is the we the people of India. It starts, and that's what shows the relevance of political philosophers in day-to-day life. So it is a social contract. The question is it an Hobbesian contract or is it a Lockean contract? Why is it a Lockean contract? Certain basic minimum rights are defended in the state, as opposed to Hobbesian idea of social contract, where state is all powerful. So the fact that you provide certain minimum rights to the people shows that it is a Lockean social contract. Is this point clear to everyone? Okay. Having solemnly resolved to constitute India into sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens, first thing that India wants to secure is justice. Why do you think that is the case? Why didn't we write equality, liberty, justice, or liberty, equality, justice? Because no state that is seen as unjust survives. And the important word is seen. You can do justice, but you should not be seen as doing injustice. Correct? And so, who said this? Huh? B.R. Ambedkar? Kuch bhi. Yes. No state can survive if it is seen as unjust. Correct? And look at justice. But first, what we talk about? Social justice. What is social justice? Against historical injustices committed by the society. Justice is what? Providing everyone what is due to them. The Constitution of India chooses very carefully the sequence of the words social, economic, political. But when it comes to providing it to the citizens, it's the opposite. We start by providing political justice, by providing them political representation. In the unamended Constitution, we had affirmative action in political representation. Article 330 to 342. Then we move on to try to make an endeavor about economic justice by providing an unenforceable section in Part 4 of the Constitution, which is DPSP. But do you really think any effort has been made in the Constitution of India to provide social justice? There was none in the unamended Constitution. To the extent, there is none for the women, part of the social justice. So what is social justice? If you're a math student, it is a summation of SC/ST justice, transgender justice, women justice. So if you do justice to all the historically deprived community, you sum it up, and what you get is a social justice. So priority-wise, liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. Again, you should not believe that it is just random thought, expression, belief. If you protect thought and expression, you automatically protect faith and worship. Because faith is nothing but a thought, and worship is nothing but an expression. So most of the countries of the world do not even protect your religion. They just protect thought and expression. And that's what protects your religion also. Because ultimately they are one component of your thought and one component of your expression. Okay. Equality of status and opportunity. Okay. All right. And to promote among them all fraternity, which assures dignity. We have discussed this in prelims classes, remember? Okay. Let's now start looking at how and what has changed in last 50 years. We, the people of India, are very serious, solemnly resolved to constitute India into sovereign. Do you really think the idea of sovereignty as it existed in the traditional sense is changing in modern times? How is it changing? Okay, so sovereignty means what? You should be able to define these terms in one sentence. How do you define sovereignty? That is one component.
Lawmaking.
Lawmaking power is not sovereignty. Yes, sovereignty means being externally independent is one component, but existing as internally supreme. Can you give me an example as to whether India is a sovereign nation or not? Talk about internal supremacy.
Abrogation of Article
UCC नहीं implement हुआ है. So that is a problem of sovereignty. Very good. Yeah, so can anyone talk about how India is internally supreme? So for example, when you get articles in the constitution that no tax shall be imposed except by a law. No person shall be deprived of life and personal liberty except by a procedure established by law. What do you think? This is sovereignty. So, for example, do you think that a group of people in a village sitting in the form of Khap Panchayat have the right to administer justice? Huh? Yes. In Nagaland, they can, because the Constitution of India gives them the power. But in Haryana, in UP, in Bihar, it does not give them power. It becomes illegal. Manifestation of sovereignty. Sovereignty does not always comes in the form of being internally supreme. The sovereignty can also create someone else as supreme, but that also should come from a law. So in Nagaland, we created a law. We modified the constitution, amended it to create special create special jurisdiction, and that's where it's fine. So there, the criminal administration is also in the hands of the leaders, local leaders. There's no problem. But here it cannot happen. Again, how these words are changing with time, you have to tell me, or what are the issues facing sovereignty in India? Quickly. Being externally supreme, externally independent would mean, okay. What do you mean by externally supreme? Sovereignty? Uninfluenced. So the idea of sovereignty is that if these are the borders, the truly sovereign nation should be able to control the inflow and outflow of goods from the borders, people, and information from the border. Is modern India able to control the flow of goods and services? You become a member of WTO, you lose the sovereignty to be able to control your borders with respect to goods. You become a full member of WTO, you sign TRIPS, which is trade-related intellectual property rights. You give away the rights for the flow of information also. You will not be able to manage industrial secret the way you want to, copyrights, information the way you want to. You become a part of digital infrastructure. There is no way the Indian state can control the inflow and outflow of information as long as that information is being communicated over information technology or internet. So modern Indian sovereign state is a very weak sovereign state. By becoming a part of international groups or multilateral organizations, every state dilutes its sovereignty and gives up a lot of jurisdiction listed as a sovereign power earlier. You become a part of Paris climate deal. Do you think you have the right to emit to whatever level you want to? Not that it is justified, but a sovereign state should be able to. But the fact that India will not be able to shows that India is not sovereign. That is only as far as the external sovereignty goes in terms of goods and services. By becoming a part of, so for example, IMF, do you have the full freedom in carrying out your monetary policy? Ask Pakistan. Cannot, right? There are huge restrictions on the way you can carry out. So you can see that by becoming a part of a, that is about external sovereignty. Do you think India is any more internally supreme? So for example, can India make any law that they want, that India wants? if it is allowed by the constitution, then can India make any law that India wants? There are pressure groups. The first problem which corrodes the internal supremacy of India comes from, again, being a part of multilateral organization. If you sign a treaty on human rights, you cannot pass a law to kill the people, even though that is allowed by the constitution, as long as that comes from a law. In fact, we kill people. We put them to death sentence. That is legal. So Indian constitution can allow a law, can create a law which allows the government to kill people. But because the human rights discourse is so heightened across the globe, that you have lost the capability to take away the lives of the people as you want. Then the emergence of pressure groups. What are these pressure groups? We'll see later on, or can be called as interest groups. They have risen in power to the level that they compete with the state in terms of policy making and implementation. Farmers' law, farmers' bills, they were passed by the Lok Sabha, they were passed by the Rajya Sabha, they were signed by the president, but they had to be taken back because of the pressure group. Farmers' unions, these are the pressure groups. So you can see that state action had to be reversed because pressure groups did not agree to that state action. So what do you think? Internally, they're competing with the power of the state. So internally, the state of India is not at all supreme, right? So in modern times, you can see that in terms of sovereignty, Indian sovereignty, because of the willing dilution of the sovereignty, has lost a lot of element of what traditionally sovereignty meant. No, insurgency is not it is a threat to territorial integrity, but not sovereignty. Because India has not given up on those areas. Yeah. Socialism. What is the socialist word means here? And why do you see different colors of socialist and secular? Do you see different colors? If you don't see different colors, then you will not get IPS. Yeah, if you see, then it's fine. This is a medical test right now before your interview. Okay, so socialist and secular. These words are boxed in different color because they were not in. Why do you think they were not in the original constitution? Do you think Indian constitution did not create a secular constitution? तो मतलब इट वाज इनहेरेंट, तो इसलिए लिखने की क्या जरूरत है? तो ऐसे डेमोक्रेसी नहीं लिखते ना, सॉवरेन भी था, इनहेरेंट है, तो क्यों लिखा फिर? ट्रेडिशनल सेंस में क्या नहीं है? Online people, the question is that why these words became a part of the constitution later on and not really to begin with. डाल नहीं सकते थे. और
Sir, am I audible?
yes, Gracie.
Sir, adding the word socialist would mean determining the future of India when
Future of India.
people should themselves be able to decide whether they want to be a socialist country or a capitalist one. And adding
Okay.
secular would mean it will be similar to the ideas of West, because secularism meant something. There was a correct definition for it. But
Yes.
India's secularism was different.
Very good. So what she says is that the first problem is that we understand what is socialism. Can we define socialism? State controls the factors of progression. That is okay. How many of you agree that socialism means state controls the factors of production? Yes. Yeah, not the state. They're not the same. They're not the same. Okay. Anyways, so the Indian constitution, even if did not provide for socialism, it is clear that there are elements of socialism, especially in DPSP. That is clear. But the word, obviously, Ambedkar said that will take away a lot of freedom from the hands of future generations, because it's like imposing a particular socio-economic idea of the society on them. It's like the same reason why we did not use the word liberal over here. Although our constitution is inherently liberal. Do you agree that Indian constitution is liberal in nature? It prioritizes rights. Rights are enforceable. Socialist elements are not enforceable. So that's why, but we did not use the word liberal over here. The same way we did not use the word socialist over there. Because by writing socialism would mean that there is an obligation on the upcoming governments to go in that direction. And Ambedkar said that that is against democracy. We should give full freedom to the people. Third reason to love Ambedkar is like this broad thinking. He said that let them choose. We have provided the framework. Let them come to power and decide whether they want to capitalists, want to be liberals, want to be socialists, and they should have full freedom. That is main reason why we did not use the word socialism. However, the reason to not include secularism in the original constitution are a bit different. Do you think there was no agreement in the Constituent Assembly to not provide for secular constitution? Obviously, everyone agreed that we need to decouple the state from religion. Why do you think we need to decouple the state from religion? Liberty, yeah, so you have to give liberty also, just like any other political ideology. Religion is also a political ideology, a set of ideas to gain power. And in that, religion is a totalitarian ideology. It tries to control all aspects of human existence. So for example, if you go to a right-wing ideology, they will not try to determine in most cases what you want to wear. A communist will not try to determine what you want to wear, whom you want to interact with. Every organized religion dictates what to eat and what not to eat also. Intervention into your liberty of food, who to marry, whom to not marry, right to life. Then whom to interact, whom to not interact. Also, every religion dictates where to go and where not to go, where to settle, where not to settle. So you can see that coexistence of state, modern state, and religion is impossible. They're matches made in hell. So you would have to create, either the society should secularize, give up on religion, which has happened in West naturally, organically, or you will have to. So the problem is that if you've written down the word secularism over here, it would denote the particular idea of the state as it existed in the West, where the society had secularized early on, where the role of religion declined early on. And then people said, we don't need religion. Religion can be one of the ways, one of the methods to determine our existence, but not the sole parameter determining our lives. Correct? Is this making sense? That's the reason why we did not include the word socialism and secularism. But the Constitution of India, especially in the form of Article 39B and C, provided for, and this is what defines India's socialism, where you do not go for the one. What you say is the Indian socialism is a kind of socialism which closely finds its name as Fabian socialism or Fabianism or democratic socialism, another keyword. India's socialism is not socialism, it is democratic. You know that there is multiple strands coming out of the ideas of social ownership, right? So you have communism, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, all of them belong to the same larger family of left. One of the streams is democratic socialism, which aspires to equitably distribute the resources of the society through democratic means. So they are not up for revolution. They are not up for dictatorship of proletariat. What they say is that the ownership and control of the material resources of the community, Supreme Court case going on this interpretation of as to what is material resource, we will discuss it later, are so distributed as best to subserve the common good. And see that the operation of economic system does not result in the concentration of wealth, means of production, and common detriment. How do you differentiate and what is the meaning of B and C? Let's understand that and disperse. I think you need a break. We'll start. Just interpret B and C and then we'll start from here tomorrow. Article 39B and C, do you really think they talk about the same aspect? Why? Exactly. So what the Constitution of India said since the beginning is, let's imagine what are the mechanisms through which people are either inherently wealthy So how can people become inherently wealthy? By possessing a lot of land or a forested area where there is a huge potential for mining, right? If you, let's say you're born with 3,000 acres of land where there's coal located, so you do not need to do anything in your life, especially not in this class. You have no interest. And so that is what it says, is that the ownership and control of the material resources of the community should be distributed so as to subserve the common good. So one of the mechanisms through which you can violate socialism is by inherently possessing the material resource which makes you rich. However, Ambani was not born rich, right? Adani was not born rich, right? How do these people become rich apart from the crony capitalism? These people become rich through modes of economic system, operation of the economic system. When the rupee changes hand, right? Economics, how does economic system operates? Same 10 rupees can flip over so many times to create the India's GDP also, you know that, right? So the number of hands that a single rupee changes more often than not, it creates the GDP. Yes, velocity of the money creates GDP, and it should not lead to the concentration, because every transfer of 10 rupee creates a value for someone and takes away value from someone. And these are the only two mechanisms which create inequality in the society, which is a concern for socialists. So what they say is that land reform should be allowed, Article 39B. Nationalization of mines should be allowed, Article 39B. Forests should be under state possession, Article 39B is a state property, because forests are, after all, rich resources. But then you cannot nationalize Air India and Bank by 39B because they are means of economic production. So for that, you need Article 39C. And so what you do when Indira Gandhi, or even to some extent Jawaharlal Nehru, wanted to nationalize the sector, they utilize Article 39C. The operation of economic system does not result in concentration of wealth. Sir, banking system in private hands is creating problems. Let's nationalize. Okay, fine. Is this making sense? Is this clear to everyone? So this is what the Indian socialism looks like. And so the question is that, what was the question that we framed? The relevance of socialism in LPG. So when the socialism was provided, until 1991, everything was fine. And the question would not have arisen as to what socialism really means in the current context. But look at what we have done. We have liberalized, which means that probably barring atomic energy, there is none of the sectors which is reserved only for the public sector. In fact, to the extent that almost in every sector, we have allowed 100% FDI through automatic route. So forget about Indian capital. We have globalized to the extent. What does Article 39C means in the current context? Is it relevant now? Should we remove it? Yes. So progressive taxation still exists. So the idea is that the word socialism is not irrelevant, because it has been 30 years since we have liberalized, started privatizing and globalizing, and we have realized the ills of these policies also at the same time. What we see is that income inequalities shoot every year. There's a huge inequality. Oxfam India report says that how many percent of the people control? You can also give the Ambani marriages, the everlasting marriages, like probably 2024 will be remembered as, this is what reflection of inequality, correct? So trying to facilitate. Yes. So what LPG has done, that LPG obviously created a huge dent to the socialist character of the Indian state. But at the same time, because the ills were realized, the nature of India's socialism has transitioned. So how the India's socialism existed early on was, do not allow the concentration of wealth to happen. Now the idea is allow the concentration, then progressively tax the rich and utilize the increased taxation to carry out Pradhan Mantri, ab yahan se start kar lo, all the yojanas. Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Jan Dhan Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Ayushman Bharat Yojana, and all the schemes. This is nothing but a manifestation of a socialist character, or rather, what you said is a welfare state of India. The state which will not disallow you to concentrate the wealth, but once you do, above a certain level, we will tax you extra and redistribute. So now the focus is on redistribution of wealth by progressive taxation, which is also socialist characteristic. So can we say that India is not socialist? India is, but India has transitioned from democratic socialism to welfare state. Is this making sense to everyone? Okay. Can we discuss one more, or should we end and reassemble tomorrow? Huh? Raise your hands if you want to end the class now. Okay. ठीक है, बोल क्यों नहीं रहे थे फिर? All right, so we will start. We will re-discuss this, and then we will move on. Complete preamble, and please do read fundamental rights before coming, because we'll start with fundamental rights tomorrow and we'll finish it day after. Okay. All right. Online people. Okay. All right.
Thank you, sir.
All right.